This is a lecture from Open Tuition. For the free lecture notes that go with this podcast, please visit opentuition.com. What I want to carry on with now is an alternative form of costing, which in principle, as you'll see, is very, very easy indeed, but then there can be some problems, which is process costing. And it's chapter 10, page 57. But you will see there are several chapters all headed up process costing, which I'll explain as we go through. And first of all, this first chapter, there's a very baby example just to show you how easy it is in principle. But before we look at the example, yesterday, when we were costing out, we make desks. The cost card, we were working out the cost of one desk. Agreed? And okay, maybe we do marginal, maybe we do absorption. This question, do we include fixed overheads or not? But in both cases, you're taking one desk, measure the wood, see how long it takes and so on, and cost out one desk. Okay? Sorry, that may be obvious, but you are clear. And think about a builder. I said a builder builds houses, but maybe every house is different. 2 bedrooms, 5 bedrooms, etc. Well, same principle, but of course, you'd have to cost out each building separately. You would agree? Process costing, as you'll see, and I'll be more specific when I've shown you the example, but process costing is very useful when you're making thousands of identical products. If I was making cars and I'm making thousands of cars a year and they're all exactly the same, then as an alternative to costing out one car on its own, what we can do is so simple it's untrue. Look at example 1. Example 1. During February, the following costs were incurred. In total, we're spending $20,000 on materials. In total, we're spending $10,000 on labour. In total, we're spending $8,000 on overheads. We're making 2,000 units. Well, assuming they're all identical units, they're all exactly the same, 2,000 cars, Instead of measuring each car separately, if I want the cost of a unit, why don't I just get the total cost, divide by the number of units, and get a cost per unit? And that's all we do. But here, how much are we spending in total? I know you can almost do it in your head, but I'm going to write it down. Materials, we spend 20,000. Labour, 10,000. Overheads, 8,000. So in total, we're spending what? 38,000? That's the total cost this month, making how many units? 2,000. And if I want to know the cost of making each unit, surely, if I spend 38 making 2,000, the cost per unit, 38,000 over 2,000, each unit is effectively costing $19. Now, no tricks, but does that make sense, everybody? And although there are 2 big problems can arise, which I'm coming to in the later chapters, basically that's all we're trying to do. I've said it twice, let me say it one last time. Instead of measuring one desk on its own, what we were doing yesterday, do it in total, divide. It's $19 a unit. Okay? Does that make sense, everybody? Now, in the exam, it's not up to you to decide which way to do it, if you understand me. You know, there are the two approaches. In real life, you could cost out each unit like yesterday, or you can do it in total. As I say, in the exam, you're not left to choose. They tell you what to do. But there are two situations that make this approach very useful. One I've already said. I think very obviously you'd only use this approach when you're making lots of identical units. If this were 2,000 houses you were making, and some were big houses, some were small houses, I think you'd agree it'd be silly to say they're all $19 each. And so it's where you're making lots of identical units. I think from what I've already said, I think that should be clear. The other thing, though, and the reason we call it process costing, don't we worry here, don't let this upset you, but I think what I'm about to say should make sense. A very common way of making things, cars are a good example, that a very standard way of making cars is that they have what we call a production line. And that what might happen when you make a car is perhaps, first of all, they go into one room where they turn the metal into the shape of a car. If you understand me. So, you know, this room, all the room does is get the metal and it becomes a car shape. And then all these shapes perhaps go into a second room. And maybe in the second room, they paint the car. You know, and then maybe it goes into another room. And all the other room ever does, they put the wheels on. Now, obviously, there are going to be a lot. I haven't put an engine in. I'm not going to go on and on. But you understand me, it's a very common way of producing things like cars, where you've got a series of processes. One room just builds the car, one room just puts the wheels on, etc. And then, without me sort of wasting your time, then it's finished. And we sell it. Everybody? And we call them processes. So this would be process number 1. This would be process number 2. Process number 3, and so on. Well, the reason I'm doing that, and you do all accept what I'm saying, it's not the only way you can make cars, but it's very common. The point is, when you come to the end of the month, or end of year, you are likely to have inventory of cars at different stages. You know, I might have 100 cars that have been finished and are ready for sale. I might have another 50 cars which process 1 has finished, but they haven't yet been painted and had the wheels on. True? And again, to be able to value them, of course, a car that's finished is going to be worth more, has cost more than a car that hasn't had its wheels on. You would agree? And so, again, process costing is useful, because I might say, process 1, maybe, on materials we're spending 5,000, maybe labour I'm spending 1,000, just a few baby figures. But if that's how much I've spent in process 1, if I've spent a total of 6,000, and we've produced, 1,000 units, then I can say, well, every unit that's had the shape and nothing else, at that stage, I divide, and they're costing $6 each. Yep, just like I did a minute ago. And so, at the end of the month, if I have any units, any cars that have only had the shape made, they'd be valued at $6. However, those 1,000, let's suppose they all went into the painting room. Well, of course, so far I've spent 6,000. You agree? But in the painting room, we spend more money. Perhaps on materials we spend an extra 1,000 for the paint. Maybe we spend an extra 500 on labour. You're all following me here? And if there are still 1,000 units, how much are they now worth per unit? Divide, they're now worth $7.50. Now, I'm not going to carry on because I think you can see what's happening. But if you do have a series of processes like this, then you're likely to want to know the value of the cost of the car at each stage. There it's cheap, it's only had the metal. Here it's a bit more because it's been painted. Here it's a bit more because it's got wheels on. Well, for each process, what's the total cost? Divide by total units. It's $6 after the first. It's $7.50 after the second. And again, I don't think I need to do a third, but the same idea. All right? Now, don't panic. They never have you deal with a whole series of processes. But whether there's one process or 20 of them, for any individual process, to get the cost, you're adding up everything you've spent. You're dividing by the number of units. There is the cost per unit. Okay? All right, so that's what we're doing, and never forget that, because at the moment it's too easy, obviously. Even my sister could add up costs and divide by 1,000 units. The problem in the exam, there are two separate problems that can occur. You'll see I've listed them on page 59. There are actually 3 there, but the 2 main ones. Page 59, one problem is we can have losses, and I'm going to explain in the next chapter. Hello? What are you doing, man? Yes, and I'm going to explain in the next chapter. It's the list on page 59. Another problem, which is a bit more involved, is what we call work in progress. Again, I'll explain. It's in a later chapter. Page 59 does mention a third one, joint products. Well, again, it's a later chapter. But as you'll see, although strictly it's part of process costing, it's almost like a separate topic on its own. Okay? So we have 3 areas to go in, making it a bit more complicated, perhaps. But I'll say again, never forget, whatever the problems are, the basic idea is to get a cost per unit. And whatever the problems are, it's essentially add up costs, divide by number of units. Okay? Finally, before I leave this chapter, normally, almost every question in the exam, whatever problems I bring in, they're just after the costing. You know, for that one, however easy, the answer's $19, finished. It is just possible, it's less likely, but it's just possible that they could check you a little bit on the double entry. It's much less likely they can't ask you to write up T accounts, but they could throw in 1, 2 questions where they've done a T account and expect you to understand it. All right? Now, it's the only place in the exam, and I say again, it is unlikely, but just let me show you to be safe, because the management accountant clearly will have to be recording the costs so that at the end of the month they can actually do the numbers. All right? And so I have left space on page 58 for this same little example we've just done. Let me show you what we call the process account. And although I'll tell you where double entries would be, it's this one account they could just check you on. Okay? And what's happening, I say again, the management accountant clearly, well, I think clearly, they'll have to record how much we're spending. They will have recorded how much materials we've bought. They will record how much labour we've spent. You would agree? But because they're all being used in this process to make cars, they'll then have to put all the costs together so they've got the total cost they've spent. And the way they do it, they take the costs, they debit the process account with each cost. So how much did we spend? Sorry, materials we spent 20,000. We debit the process account. Now the double entry, they don't test you on the other entry. And Katerina, you went here for F3, but I think you've seen basic debits credits. Yeah. What actually happens, but don't worry here, is you see when they buy material, credit cash, debit materials. You know, they might buy 30,000 material, let's say. When they use the material in the process, whenever they use material, they credit the material account with the amount they've used, and they charge the process. And on my invented figures here, they'd still have 10,000 material left in inventory. You agree? But every time they use any, they put it to the process. It's part of the cost of this process. In a similar way, labour. They'll record all the labour they pay, but any labour used in the process, they'll charge to the process. How much was it? 10,000? And similarly, the overheads. They'll have an account recording all the overheads they're spending. Any used in this process, they'll charge to the process. So every cost involved this month, we're charging. Okay? Standardly, we also keep a check on the units. And so, I think I've put there, but yes I have. We have two columns. We have a column for keeping check on the dollars, but we need to check how many units we're making. Well, we always attach units to materials. These cars, we say, well, as soon as we start using the metal, that's when we start making the units. All right? And how many units are we making here? I've turned over. Was it 2,000? So, we put 2,000 against materials. We say we're working on 2,000. And there's what we've spent. Okay? Well, we've come to the end of the month. It's at that stage we do our costings. And we had that little thing. All right, we spent 38,000, 2,000. It came to $19 a unit. And we then say, well, what happened to those 2,000 units? Surely we've done the work, those units are finished, they leave the process. We credit the process with 2,000 units. And they either go to another process, debit another process, or they're finished goods. We debit finished goods. But how much will they be valued at? It's 19 a unit. It's 38,000. And of course the T account balances. And there we are. Now that may seem almost too obvious. But you'll see as I bring in these two big problems there can be, It involves slightly more thinking. But we all see out what's happened there. You debit with all the individual costs. You work out a cost per unit. Here, if all the units have been finished, fine. 2,000 leave, 19 each, 38. Okay? Alright, so that's what's happening. Can I say again, the chance of a T account is tiny. But as I did say, although you won't be drawing one, they could just have a question, say, here is a T account, and check you understand it. Okay? But the bulk of the work, nearly all the questions, no T account at all, it's getting your $19 a unit. Well, I didn't need a T account to do that. All right?